Wise from National Journal.
Hi, thanks for the question. Two things. Firstly, when will Trump announce his 2024 presidential bid? I'll start with that.
Is there a follow-up?
There will be a second question, but I thought I'd just start with
Well, he'd like to have done it already. And I give him credit for many things this year, because he's going to end up being a big winner from this election cycle. Try as everybody did to say you nominated the wrong people, you didn't give enough money, you're in the way, go away. Donald Trump in some ways never stopped campaigning from early 2015. First for himself, and in between for many, many different candidates. I mean, unlike Joe Biden, Trump was highly in demand in 2018 and did what he could to show up for many of these races, could only go for a couple of the House seats, but went around for a lot of the Senate seats. And we picked up seats in the Senate after the Kavanaugh hearings. Again, something totally misread, respectfully. We picked up seats in the United States Senate in 2018. Hard to do, lost, I think, 40 seats or so in the House. So he never stopped campaigning, including into his post-presidency years. And I would say it's hard for me to see that Joe Biden ever started really campaigning. Did he ever start campaigning for himself in 2019, 2020, after COVID hit? And he certainly isn't welcome in most places and spaces now. So in many ways, don't miss why and how Trump is running for president again, if he would like, because he actually never stopped being part of this. So he would have liked, I give him credit for staying in the game this cycle, with very few exceptions, and I can't even think of any right this second. I can think of the individual candidates like Matt Dolan in Ohio, who lost, but I can't think of individual Republicans on the ballot who are not running mostly, if not almost completely, on the America First agenda and the Trump-Pence accomplishments. So his legacy continued. So that's one. I give him a ton of credit for not announcing this year, for not stepping in the way of the midterm candidates, which a lot of people around him who frankly need him for their next meal and their next gig and their next center of power were urging him and begging him and leaking to a lot of you that he would be announcing any moment. I'm glad that he didn't do that. That was certainly my advice from the beginning. Wait until after the midterms, if you do it all. Secondly, I like the fact that he came back to Washington at the end of July, a full year and a half since leaving on January 20th, 2021, and gave a policy speech. It took President Trump an hour and a minute, roughly, to get to the 2020 election in that policy speech at AFPI, which you all covered. And then he went on to CPAC and gave mostly a policy speech. So when he does that, when people hear the binary choice and they're reminded of why his words, "You miss me, don't you?" They'll say, you know what? I'm going to push aside whatever I don't like, and I'm going to vote my pocketbook, my personal liberty, my fear of crime, my frustration with no baby formula on the shelves, rising costs of gas and groceries, which is a 6-month-old conversation. The conversation now is utilities, insurance, rent, mortgage, tuition, student loan payment. So I think you can expect him to announce soon. Obviously, there's a family wedding coming up on his property, and election day is late this year. But as he would say, wait and see. And then he's got a lot to think about too, though, because the super PAC obviously can't be converted into a presidential source of funding. I ask him all the time. I asked him this summer, what happens to your fund and your funding? He said, what do you mean on the funding piece? He was very conversant with what he can and cannot do. He'd obviously been deeply briefed on that, and he knows that already. And then I ask about his fund, because I care about him, the person. He's got a great life. He's got a great post-presidency life. They're making money. Again, he's involved in here's somebody unlike President George W. Bush or President Bill Clinton, President Barack Obama. They left the presidency after 2 terms as young men. And that was it. I think one of the worst things that could ever happen to those gentlemen is a former cabinet secretary or former senior staffer saying, oh, Mr. President, hello, I'm running for office. Will you help me? Oh, geez. I've left all that behind. Donald Trump is just getting started. So he loves this stuff and wants to continue. So I think you should, maybe keep your cell phone on. And sorry if you made any post-election plans, since these races are never all called in time. There's always a runoff in Louisiana or Georgia, it seems these days, somehow. But he would like to have announced by now. And I think the fact that he hasn't is really a big credit to him and his restraint and him wanting to help in these midterms and not step on them. He's being urged by some people to still have a surprise, a November surprise. But we're trying to mitigate November surprises for all the candidates and include message discipline. Last point, if and when Donald Trump announces his presidential run, it doesn't scramble the Republican field, it scrambles the Democratic field. I think that's when the George Wills of the world really kick into high gear and say, what are we doing here? We're going to have a cage match, rematch of these two. And I know Ron Klain, Tweeter, Not a Leader, and others like to say, well, we're ready for Trump. We want to run against Trump again. Do they really? Because you've seen the polls, even if not just the rematch polls, the complete, unarguable, indisputable lack of popularity and lack of approval of a sitting president, and frankly, many pieces of his agenda that they've not been able to sell in a way that makes people have confidence in their competence. That's just very clear. So do they really want to do that? I think the Democrats then have a hard time, and they would have liked to have. I always give advice to the Democrats. They would have liked to have been able to say, you know what, Joe Biden, step aside. You finally got the brass ring. You helped get rid of Donald Trump. Thank you very much. You've been running for president for decades. You did it. You go down as history. You did it. But please step aside and take credit for one more historic thing. We could just elevate and then elect your female vice president. No one can say that. 18 senior staffers have left her. If they don't want to work for her, if they don't want her to be vice president or president, what about the rest of us? They simply cannot say to him, your vice president, your handpicked vice president is waiting in the wings and she's ready to do the job. She won't make it. They don't want her either. So I think it scrambles the Democratic field almost immediately.
And how does Trump's